The negotiation table, a priceless slab of floating marble mined from a dead moon, smashed through the panoramic viewport with a deafening shatter. The vacuum of space instantly howled, sucking the velvet drapes, the ceremonial fruit bowl, and Vex's dignity out into the void. Emergency shutters slammed down like guillotine blades, cutting off the gale and sealing the breach with a resounding metallic boom that shook the floor. Amber warning lights began to strobe, casting long, frantic shadows across the Crystal Tribunal. Vex, the High Councilor of the Cephalopod Alliance, spun wildly in the sudden air pressure shift, his anti-grave harness whining in protest. His neon blue tentacles flailed, tangling around his own translucent brain sac as he shrieked in a frequency that made teeth ache. He righted himself, his skin flushing a furious, bruised purple, and pointed a trembling appendage at the center of the room. Ren, the human combat engineer, stood perfectly still amidst the chaos. She looked like a heavily armored deep-sea diver who had taken a wrong turn into a royal palace. Her enviro suit was bulky, covered in grease stains and scratches, starkly contrasting with the pristine white and gold architecture. She didn't look up at the screaming squid alien. She was staring at her wrist gauntlet, tapping a reboot sequence for her suit's atmospheric scrubbers. Behind her sat the cubs. To any human observer, they would have elicited an immediate high-pitched awe, followed by a terrified scream. They looked exactly like terrestrial lion cubs, if lion cubs were the size of cargo vans. Grok, the male, was a mountain of golden fluff and iridescent green armor plates. He had the oversized, clumsy paws of a baby, a slightly too big head, and rounded, fuzzy ears that twitched independently. He sat on his haunches, 7 feet tall, blinking his massive liquid amber eyes with an innocence that betrayed the fact that he weighed 3 tons. Beside him, Kern, the female, was a sleek void of obsidian fur and black plating, her tail twitching with the rhythmic, hypnotic motion of a house cat watching a bird. They sat perfectly still, their giant pink tongues occasionally rasping over their lips, watching Ren with unblinking, terrifying devotion. Vex descended, floating just out of reach of the cub's playful swatting range. He demanded an explanation. He accused Ren of sabotage. He claimed the table-launching incident, which was actually caused by a malfunctioning gravity emitter, was a deliberate act of war by the human delegation. Ren sighed. The sound was amplified by her external speakers, a deep mechanical exhale that sounded like a venting airlock. The humidity inside her helmet was spiking. Her goggles, already smudged from a long shift in the engine room, completely fogged over. Ren couldn't see Vex. She couldn't see the cubs. She saw only a wall of gray condensation. She reached up with both gloved hands and unlatched the heavy pressure clips on the sides of her helmet. Click, hiss. She pulled the goggles away from her face, letting them hang by the strap. She blinked, her eyes red-rimmed and tired. She fished a dirty, oil-stained rag from her utility belt and began to vigorously wipe the lenses, scrubbing in tight circular motions to clear the fog. Grak's ears, tipped with tufts of sensory fur, swiveled forward. His vertical pupils dilated until his eyes were black pools of murder cuteness. He let out a low, subsonic chuff that vibrated the floorboards. To a Leonine Vanguard, whose culture was built on pack hunting and site-based hierarchy, the alpha wiping her eyes was not hygiene. It was the protocol of the unseen. It signified that the environment was so offensive, so unworthy of the alpha's gaze, that it must be erased until the alpha deigned to look again. Kern understood immediately. She rose from her haunches, her obsidian armor plates clicking together. She tilted her massive, fuzzy head to the side, looking at the room with a playful curiosity that was infinitely worse than aggression. If the alpha refused to see the room, then the room was a toy, and toys were meant to be broken. Simultaneously, the 2 7-foot alien lion cubs let out a sound that wasn't a roar, but a high-pitched, excited squeak that shattered a nearby vase. Then they moved. Grak lunged, not at Vex, but at the ornate golden pillars supporting the tribunal's vaulted ceiling. He swiped his massive, clumsy paws, claws extending like scythes. He wasn't attacking, he was playing. He batted the pillar like it was a ball of yarn. The gold plating shredded like tissue paper. The plasteel structure underneath groaned and buckled. Vex screamed, jetting upward toward the ceiling, his tentacles clutching his face. He watched in horror as Kern sprinted along the walls, defying gravity with her momentum. She looked like a black blur of fluff and death. She targeted the floating podiums, the holographic projectors, the statues of ancestors. She didn't just break them, she pounced on them. She caught a floating podium in her jaws, shook it violently like a chew toy until the anti-grave generator sparked and died, and then spat the debris into the center of the room with a satisfied moan. Wren finished wiping her goggles. She held them up, squinting to check for streaks. "Better," she mumbled. She strapped them back on, latching the clips. Through the clear lenses, she saw a very different room. Half the lighting was gone. The golden pillars were reduced to twisted, scratching posts. Grack was currently lying on his back in a pile of expensive debris, batting at a dangling wire with his giant paws. Kern was sitting politely amidst a pile of shattered glass, looking at Wren with wide, expectant eyes, her tail thumping the floor. Wren keyed her comms. She asked Grack in a tired voice what he was doing. Grack rolled over, crashing into the wall with a thud that shook the station. He looked at Wren, then looked at the debris, then let out a soft, purring chirp that sounded like an idling diesel truck. He nudged the pile of scrap toward her with his wet nose. "Look, Alpha, we cleared the visual obstruction. You can see now." Wren stared at him. She looked at Vex, who was hyperventilating near the ceiling vents. She shrugged. "Whatever. Let's go." She turned and walked toward the exit. The door was a magnificent archway of crystal and light, or it had been. Now it was blocked by falling debris. Wren stopped. She put her hands on her hips, stretching her back. She rolled her shoulders, rotating her neck to crack a stiff joint. Crack. Kern's tail stopped twitching. She watched the neck crack. In the Vanguard language, the snap of the neck was a directive for pathfinding by a brute force. It meant the current path was too narrow and required widening. Kern let out a happy yip. She threw her shoulder into the wall beside the blocked door. The wall was made of reinforced bulkhead material, but Kern weighed 2 tons and was moving with the kinetic energy of a freight train. She didn't hit it aggressively. She hit it like she was trying to burst through a door to greet her owner. She punched a hole straight through the drywall and the metal supports. Grack joined her, unable to resist the fun. He jammed his head into the hole, got stuck for a second, wiggled his giant fuzzy butt, and then shoved his way through, peeling back the metal plating like he was opening a cardboard box. They didn't clear the debris blocking the door, they simply made a new door, a much wider, jagged, and terrifying door. Wren watched them rip a hole in the station's hull wall. She checked her oxygen levels. "That works," she muttered, stepping through the jagged breach into the maintenance sublevel. Location 2, the maintenance sublevel, was a sensory nightmare. Steam vented from rusted pipes in rhythmic bursts. The floor was metal grating, looking down into the dark machinery of the station. Amber emergency lights spun, creating dizzying shadows. Wren's heavy boots clanked on the grating. The cubs padded silently behind her, their claws retracted, moving like ghosts despite their size. They were batting at the steam jets, snapping their jaws at the drifting particles, acting for all the world like oversized kittens exploring a basement. They needed to reach the star drive to unlock the docking clamps on Wren's ship, but the corridor was blocked by a security checkpoint. A heavy durasteel gate barred the way, and a floating sentry bot hovered at eye level. The bot flashed red and blared a siren, demanding identification. Wren hated sirens. They gave her a migraine. She winced, reaching up to her helmet to adjust the audio dampeners. She tapped the side of her helmet repeatedly with a flat palm, thump, 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 trying to get the noise cancellation to kick in. Grack saw the flat palm strike against the head. To the cubs, this was the silencing strike. It meant the alpha was being deafened by prey, and the prey needed to be hushed, permanently. Grack didn't roar this time. He moved with terrifying speed. He leaped over Wren's head, a blur of green armor and fluff. He caught the floating sentry bot in midair with both paws. He didn't smash it with malice. He caught it like a butterfly. He pressed it between his massive palms with a confused expression, like he was trying to figure out what it was. The siren cut off instantly with a sad crunch. Grack landed gracefully, the flattened metal pancake of the bot dropping to the floor. He sniffed it, sneezed, and then looked at Wren with his head tilted, his big ears flopped forward. "Did I fix it, Mom?" Wren lowered her hand. The silence was blissful. "Good kitty," she mumbled, stepping over the wreckage. Grack preened, his armor plates rippling with pride, and he rubbed his massive head against Wren's leg, nearly knocking her over. They approached the gate. It was locked. Wren looked at the control panel. It was a complex alien interface with unrecognizable symbols. She didn't have the codes. She sighed, looking at her gloved hands. She started to pull off her heavy gauntlets, finger by finger, so she could try to hotwire the panel with her bare hands. She tugged at the thick fingers of the gloves, loosening them. Kern watched the shedding of the claws. This was a grave signal. When the Alpha removes her outer shell, it means she is preparing for delicate work and requires the pack to handle the heavy lifting. Specifically, the open sesame protocol, which usually involved tearing things off hinges. Kern and Grak moved to the gate. They didn't wait for the hot wire. They hooked their claws into the durasteel mesh. They stood on their hind legs, looking like giant bears for a moment, and braced their paws against the frame. With a synchronized, playful growl, they pulled. The metal groaned, screamed, and then sheared. They didn't just open the gate. They pulled the entire frame out of the concrete, dragging it down the hallway with sparks flying like fireworks. They dropped it with a clang and immediately began scratching their claws on it, turning the military-grade barrier into a giant scratching post. Wren looked at her half-removed glove. She looked at the empty archway. She shrugged, pulled her glove back on, and kept walking. They arrived at Location 3, the Star Drive core. It was a cathedral of engineering. A massive vertical shaft dropped down into infinity, dominated by the pulsating blue energy column of the drive. The air was freezing here, liquid nitrogen fog rolling across the suspended walkways. Standing on the central platform was Vex. He had taken the turbolift, and he had brought friends. A dozen heavy security droids stood in a phalanx. These weren't police bots. These were warlorders, 10-foot-tall bipedal mechs with rotary cannons and riot shields. Vex floated behind them, his voice amplified by the room's PA system. "This ends here, human," Vex screeched, waving a tentacle. "Your savage beasts cannot match the precision of Alliance military hardware. Surrender or be vaporized." The mechs leveled their cannons. The barrels spun up with a high-pitched whine that echoed in the cavernous space. Grak and Kern lowered their bodies into a crouch, their butts wiggling in the air as they prepared to pounce. They weren't scared. They were excited. New toys. Wren felt a tickle in her nose. The sudden temperature drop had aggravated her sinuses. She tried to hold it back. Her face contorted behind her mask. She sniffed loudly. She shook her head. Then it happened. She sneezed. A violent, unrestrained sneeze that rattled her inside her suit. She shook her head wildly afterward, trying to clear her ears, snorting loudly to clear her nose. "Ugh!" she groaned. The cubs froze. Their ears went flat against their heads. The great snort. In the primal lore of their species, the snort was the ultimate insult. It meant the enemy smelled so bad, so offensive, that the Alpha could not breathe their air. It was a command to flush the filth. It meant the enemy was not worthy of combat. They were garbage to be washed away. Grak and Kern didn't attack the mechs directly. That would be dignified. Instead, they looked at the environment. They saw the massive, pressurized pipes feeding coolant to the core. They saw the fragile containment valves. They understood the assignment. The two giant lion cubs scattered, their paws scrambling on the metal grating like puppies on a hardwood floor. Vex laughed. "They are fleeing! Fire!" The mechs opened fire, tracer rounds tearing up the walkway where the cubs had just been. But the cubs were already gone. Grak leaped onto the vertical piping, climbing it with surprising agility for something so heavy. He reached a main distribution junction, clamped his jaws around a valve wheel the size of a tire, and ripped it off, shaking his head side to side like he was killing a rat. A geyser of supercooled liquid nitrogen exploded outward. It didn't hit the mechs directly. It hit the floor beneath them. The metal grating, instantly shock-frozen, became as brittle as glass. Kern, on the other side, found the fire suppression system. She slashed the control box with one swipe and ripped out the wiring with her teeth. The emergency sprinklers activated, not with water, but with fire-retardant foam. The chaos was absolute. The mechs, heavy and clumsy, slipped on the freezing foam. It was like watching cows on ice. Two of them collided, their rotary cannons firing wildly into the ceiling, bringing down a rain of sparks and debris. One mech took a step, and the frozen floor shattered beneath its weight. It plunged into the abyss, flailing silently. Grak wasn't done. He jumped from the pipes, landing on the back of a mech that was struggling to stand. He didn't bite it. He treated it like a living jungle gym. He dug his claws in and rode it like a bucking bronco, his tongue lolling out in pure joy. He jumped off at the last second as the mech plowed into the phalanx, knocking 3 more droids over the edge like bowling pins. Kern was sliding across the ice-covered floor on her belly, looking like a heavy armored curling stone. She slammed into the legs of the lead mech, sweeping them out from under it. As it fell, she grabbed its riot shield, spun around, and launched it like a frisbee at Vex. The shield clipped Vex's anti-grav unit. He spiraled out of the air, crashing into a pile of freezing foam. Ren wiped her nose inside her helmet. She looked up. The mechs were gone, fallen, frozen, or short-circuited. The room was covered in white foam and ice. Vex was struggling to get out of a foam drift, looking like an angry, sentient marshmallow. Ren walked over to him. She was too tired for speeches. She just wanted to unlock her ship. She pointed at the console behind Vex. "Unlock it," she said. Vex looked at the human. He looked at the 2 giant armored lion cubs who were currently rolling around in the foam. Grak was on his back, paws in the air, batting at the falling sparks. Kern was chasing her own tail, spinning in circles until she got dizzy and flopped over onto Vex's legs. I surrender, Vex gurgled, trying to push Kern's heavy tail off his chest. "Please, just control your monsters." Ren looked at Grak and Kern. Grak had found a severed mech arm and was gnawing on it contentedly. Kern was making snow angels in the foam. "They're not monsters," Ren said, patting Grak on his armored flank. The giant cub leaned into her hand, closing his eyes and purring with the force of a diesel engine. "They're just babies." Ren tapped the console, releasing her ship's clamps. She turned to leave. "Come on, kids, nap time." The cubs instantly stopped their play. They shook the foam from their manes, sending white fluff flying everywhere, fell into formation flanking Ren, and marched out of the ruined chamber with regal dignity. Though Grak did pause to try and eat a loose bolt off the floor before Ren pulled him away. Vex watched them go. He lay in the cold foam, shivering. He watched as Ren stopped at the door, turned back, and raised a hand to wave goodbye. Grak saw the wave. The swiping paw. He turned back, let out one final, deafening, high-pitched squeak roar that shattered the remaining glass control panels in the room, and then trotted happily after his alpha. Vex put his tentacles over his head and decided to stay in the foam until they left the system. It was safer this way.